Hello and welcome to episode 47 of Off the Bandstand. My name is Christian Wiggs. I am your host. Today's episode is Becca Patterson, a trombonist, educator, and composer based in New York City, but currently resides in Austin over the course of the pandemic. After receiving her undergraduate degree from Berklee College of Music, Becca dove straight into the Manhattan scene where she performed with a diverse range of ensembles, including but not limited to the Dizzy Gillespie All-Star Big Band, the Count Basie Orchestra, Christian McBride's Big Band, and performed on Broadway shows such as Wicked and The Lion King. In this episode, we talk about the rich history associated with legacy bands. We also talk about the consideration of comfortability versus complacency in a work-life balance, and a patriotic gig at a random house in Jersey that makes you think, oh, the places you'll go. So now moving on to the releases of the week. The first one comes from the 8-Bit Big Band. It's the first album they put out in 2017 called Press Start, and I will keep plugging these records until the day that I die. This is the first album from Charlie Rosen's brainchild, which is to take music from classic video game eras and format it, reimagine it into a 30 to 65 piece jazz orchestra. It's all you can do not to throw your hands up in the air, throw your head back, and laugh at just how expansive and genius Charlie's arrangements are. And Becca holds down the bass trombone chair not only on this album, but every full-length album that they've put out, and routinely performs with the band. If you want to learn more about the 8-Bit Big Band, you can go over to the8bitbigband.com. And if you want to support this release directly, you guessed it, it's going to be at the8bitbigband.bandcamp.com. And then on Instagram, here's a curveball for you. Their handle is the 8-Bit Big Band. So go and support this. It is totally worthy of your time, every single album. And this third album that they just put out this past January called Backwards Compatible that we plugged several weeks back is just unbelievable. I mean, you listen to Press Start and you go, how can it get any better? And then you listen to all the rest of the albums and Charlie just continues to, really hone in what are already, alien level, composing and arranging skills, and it's just always so much fun to listen to whatever he has cooking up next. So now moving on to the second release of the week. This is from Stephen Feifke. It's I've Got the World on a String that features Benny Benack III. And this is a really interesting project that he has going on because this is the first single off of a new record of previously released arrangements and recordings that were only on YouTube before. And it highlights the origins of the Stephen Feifke Big Band coming hot on the heels of his debut record called Kinetic that just came out, 2 months ago? So this is coming out and it's coming through a partnership with a name that we have heard a lot of recently, which is LA Reserve, an independent record label that's based out of Brooklyn that is featuring all of the hottest people on the scene right now, jazz or otherwise. So if you want to support Stephen's music and actually go and see some of these arrangements and purchase some of these arrangements that are coming up on this new release, re-release, however we want to call it, you can go over to stephenfeifkemusic.com. You can also go over to the Bandcamp for LA Reserve to support them, see all the different things that they have on their compilation records and all the things they're sponsoring going forward on their label, and that is lareserve.bandcamp.com. And then both of them are on social media and Instagram as well. You can follow Stephen at Stephen Feifke, and you can follow LA Reserve at LA Reserve. So now moving on to the month shows of the week. The first one that we want to plug is tonight. It's Thursday, June 10th at 7:30. It's Jeremy Langthorne's Quintet. And then the second one we want to plug, there's no Sunday show this week, at least that I know of. It's going to jump over to next Tuesday. It's going to be the Alex Cope Quartet. That's June 15th, Tuesday, and this is one of the final performances of the Austin Jazz Society Project Safety Net series, concert fundraiser series that is in conjunction with Monks. And then next Thursday is going to be Ron Wilkins featuring Becca Patterson, or Ron Wilkins Quintet featuring Becca Patterson on Thursday, June the 17th, and you can get tickets for that at monksjazzclub.com, as well as all of the shows that I've just mentioned and all the shows that are coming up. And there's some really special ones that might pertain to Off the Bandstand that we'll have to share with you in just a couple short weeks. So anyways, that is all for the Monk shows we want to plug. That's all for the releases of the week. Go support the 8-Bit Big Band and Stephen Feifke and his big band and all their projects. And now sit back, relax, and enjoy episode 47, Becca Patterson. This is Off the Bandstand. thing that I was really struck by just right off the bat was like, went to your website and looked and saw that there was like a statement first before kind of like the standard, what we know as like the standard performer biography. And I thought that was really, really interesting because I feel like performers don't do that very much anymore where they have a statement. It's usually something that's very much tied to like educational stuff, right? Like if you're like building a studio or like, and not to say that you're not doing that, but just, I feel like that is something that is usually lacking, and people put a lot of things from a third person perspective, but it really kind of like set a tone immediately, like when reading that it was in first person. It was you hit us with a lot of the heavy stuff like right off the bat. And I wrote down a couple of that was, you zeroed in on a few of those words, which were honesty, versatility, innovation, persistence, and quality. And those are kind of the 5 pillars of jazz, and not only jazz, just like music in general, but especially like innovation, right? Well, I guess that can apply to anything, but just more so on the side of like improvisation. And this can be like as in short or in depth as you want to make it. But what are the greatest lessons that you've learned from each one of those words and each one of those skills that have caused you to be super cognizant about those qualities?
Yeah, I think it's kind of an overall packaging thing. I feel like, because you said it is kind of like how ideally one would kind of maybe define jazz. And I think moving to New York City really kind of like, it forced me to go into the roots of that and like actually experience more about where the music came from and the people that were doing it and like the context in which they were doing it. Because the context in which we're doing jazz music is just so vastly different right now. And I kind of diverged from a lot of my peers, especially, like when I started my music education at University of Texas, San Antonio, it was chemistry, music, and then transferred to Berklee and stuff like that. But even, Berklee has a little bit of this too. Where a lot of my peers went on to get like master's and doctorate degrees and stuff like that. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And it's a great thing, I think, if you think that's right for you, but it just never really felt fully right for me. But I think one of the advantages of that was just trying to go straight to the source, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And kind of going there and just like the nature of New York City is just constantly meeting new musicians. You hang out at the musicians union, and like sometimes I would play with like 3 or 4 big bands in a day, and they would be pretty different people. I mean, that's like I didn't fully necessarily think about it at the time, but it's like that's really mind blowing, especially like thinking about it now, and just like how nothing is happening. But you get to talk to a lot of people, and a lot of those people have been around New York for a really long time. So like, an example of that would be someone like Art Barron. He was one of the last trombonists hired by Duke Ellington, and just like a master of plunger technique. But he's been around and done so many things. He's lived in New York a long time, and just like hearing, someone like his stories and sitting next to him all the time. He was also the trombonist for Rocco's Modern Life. Like if you're a 90s kid or like, I don't know. Yeah. That has like some great music, but it was like kind of crazy. I was like, oh, I've actually been listening to this dude like my whole life. That's like nuts.
Yeah.
But I think just kind of like finding roots in that. And then, like I also never would have gotten the chances to play with like the Count Basie Orchestra or the Dizzy Big Band or the Mingus Big Band. And those are all like super rooted. I know they're like kind of ghost or legacy bands, but they're still very close. They're very well managed. They're still very close to like the essence of that. And so just kind of like hearing the stories around me and stuff like that, and like thinking about what I liked about these players that I was sitting next to, those words just basically came to mind based off of like the way that they were playing and how I viewed them to kind of approach it. So it was just kind of like a mixture of all of those things, kind of observing and my feelings about it, because, the other thing, and we think about individuality, we think about all these great jazz artists and how they really are very individual. And a lot of, the university teaching is like, there's always like a spoken sense of important about individuality, but then there's kind of like this, like, I don't know, it feels like a little bit of cognitive dissonance to me, like when, especially like when you're teaching, and this doesn't happen everywhere, and this is not every teacher, but I've seen a lot of instances of people just kind of using the same material to teach people. And it's like, that's just such an individualized, personalized thing. And it's just really hard to like find this balance of like learning the roots of the music, learning the language, but also like making it sound individual. And I think that the real world, like where you have like active listeners that may not be the most well-versed, like you have the opportunity to get that feedback from the audience.
Yeah.
So, you know, like you have to think about the audience. And like, if you are in school for a really long time, your audience is mainly people that are like very, but then you think about the context, bring it back. And this is kind of like going in circles, but hopefully it makes sense.
Please. No, yes.
You go back to the roots and you think about like, when they were making their own individual voices, you know, like Trey and Bird, you know, Slide Hampton, Curtis Fuller, JJ, all these guys, they were like building that off of feedback from their audiences. Like school was not a thing, you know?
Yeah.
And then like the musicians that they were also getting feedback from were also like getting their feedback from audiences. So there's like performer, like audience kind of feedback loop, which I think makes it a lot more like personable. And yeah, I don't know, but yeah, that's basically getting back to those words that kind of describes that collective experience and thought process.
Yeah, there really are. I feel like I say this all the time on the show after somebody says, you know, a wealth of really poignant like content, you know, like you just said, that I go, oh my gosh, there's so many things I want to touch on. But I think you hit the nail right on the head on one thing of that, you know, whenever we surround ourselves in a collegiate career, because in a way it is kind of like, I mean, you can be playing at the same time, right? While you're being in school. And I also don't want to think that me, you know, as young as I am, have any authority to say anything. So these are all just like very kind of unfiltered thoughts. But I think that like you have your college career and then you have your other career that you go do, because even if you're balancing two at the same time, you're not able to fully focus on one or the other unless you isolate yourself to those things. And what you were saying about where if you know, continue to do all these degrees, and even in just like the span of like a 4-year undergraduate or 5-year undergraduate, depending on your degree, you are playing in an echo chamber of what people want to hear. Very similarly to kind of like, well, I don't want to go there. I was going to say similarly to just like, it doesn't even have to be like political, just like we kind of surround ourselves with like-minded people who have the same interests. And so it kind of becomes this echo chamber, and it really takes like a active effort to branch out and to be able to like consider other things that you would not normally be magnetically attracted to. But this idea, like you were saying, of like, you know, all these other people when they were cutting their teeth, or not even cutting their teeth, whenever they were developing their career over decades, they were listening to their audience and they were trying to figure out what people wanted to hear. And I think that sometimes, because like you said, we're kind of playing for each other, where we're all into the same niche, maybe, we kind of write off audiences sometimes, and we go, oh, well, maybe they're just not like educated enough to know or whatever. But like, then is it becoming the people's music? Then are we actually trying to make everybody inclusive, or are we perpetuating the idea that like jazz musicians play for other jazz musicians, when the case is very far from that? Like, jazz was the popular music of the day. And even to that extent, the idiom of jazz, like, transformed from decade to decade to decade. So like, it was keeping up with the times and with different sounds. And, you know, I'm sure if they heard in the 30s, if they heard Weather Report, they'd be like, what the hell is this? You know? So anyways, now I'm rambling, but that everything that you were saying just like really kind of hit. And I think another thing that I wanted to touch on was that you said these legacy bands, or like, I guess like another way to call them, are like these like kind of ghost bands where it's remnants of a previous, you know, like powerhouse, like presence in the scene. I think I used to feel like, oh, I don't want to go see X band because it's not the actual person. It's just keeping on with their name. But at the same time, we love to go and study with people who were the students of or played with other people who are now passed. So in this way, like legacy band is like a great way to put it, because it's not just like this idea of like, oh, I'm going to play the way that I interpret their style to be or whatever. It's like, no, like these people knew the person directly because they were in the band, and then maybe they mentored the next person, and then the next person, and the next person. So it does become really like an extension of that legacy, of that style of playing and that niche. That's not to say that I think it's like, oh, this is all we're supposed to do, because obviously that's not the case. Like we go and we try to innovate, like you said, one of those 5 pillars. But anyways, all my like just tiny little thoughts of what you were saying that I was trying to be like, oh no, hold on to that, because these are really poignant ideas for sure.
Yeah. But I mean, even with the legacy bands, like that was one thing I found kind of hip about them, is that they are like doing different things. I mean, like the Basie band did like all that stuff, some stuff with like Stevie Wonder, and they're definitely like trying to keep it modern in a way, but yeah, like totally. I thought I had my microphone down. Sorry. But
No,
totally, yeah, but they totally, so they like to innovate and try and do different things. And it's a school is basically what it is. I think you're basically describing, but I'm like, I think maybe like what the word you might be trying to think is like, it's a school, you know?
Yeah. Right.
And that's kind of like the benefit of that, because you're not going to get that experience playing that music anywhere else. And I mean, especially like the Basie band, the way that they have their grooves and stuff, and it's just like what you're playing is so different off the page. Like you're just really not going to get that vibe other than like from the direct descendants, I guess.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, you know, and like the Mingus Band, they've done a few things where they've like done stuff with vocalists. They've been with Roots, Frank Lacey. And they just did an album with him like singing stuff, and like Cy Johnson, who did a lot of the arrangements for him, would show up to the gigs all the time. And like,
whoa, cool.
Yeah, he's a trip. He's really cool. He's definitely, you know, older cat now, but he's still doing stuff, and he still likes to come out and listen. And so the degrees of separation are just, yeah, they're very small.
Yeah. Did you feel like any one of those 5 kind of points you learned, were any of them lopsided in learning those qualities, where you felt like you learned one of them more intimately and more thoroughly at a time, and then the other one kind of balanced out? Or did you feel like they all kind of rose together, like in this package deal, like you were saying?
I think it's in some ways hard to tell sometimes, because sometimes we have the thought before we are able, like we have the thought processed in our mind and body before we're able to really like articulate it. I definitely like, I think versatility was one of the first big things that made me realize like, oh, if I'm versatile, like that opens up my job opportunities. So I started very quickly into trying to get that versatility, learning that like out of the way, because it's hard and you're going to sound really bad at first. So I was like, I need to sound bad while I'm in college. And then, you know, I started doubling on bass trombone and tuba, and like going through the pains of like figuring out how to double. People are a lot more like forgiving of that the younger that you are. And then, you know, inherently like, you know, persistence is kind of what got me through that, because that was like, you know, it felt like I was spinning my wheels for a while. And then suddenly like all of the things I'd been practicing started to click a little bit more, especially, you know, when I was forced into situations like high pressure performance opportunities, like that makes you learn very quick. Yeah. And it's, you cannot mimic that until you're like there and you're like, oh my God, I just like got called to do this gig 2 hours ago. And I was like asleep in bed and like jumped out of my bed and like got my clothes on and like barely made it on time and haven't played in a few days type of thing. But I need to sound good right now, you know?
Yeah. How often was that the case?
I mean, that happened a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's crazy.
If you're, you know, I would say on average, like 5 to 7 times a week of performing for like probably 6 years, you know, and some weeks were lighter and some weeks were heavier and some gigs were shorter and some gigs were longer, you know, but, the thing is that, if you figure out however many times that is, times however many weeks in a year, times how like 6 years, even if it's 10% of the time, that's a lot. Like that's like 20, 30, you know, and it's always like, you know, I went through a blizzard to get to a Broadway show that ended up just getting canceled as soon as
Oh
I
my
got there. Stuff like that. Like you're kind of like when you're young and you're just moved to the city and people are like, okay, I'm going to like give this person a chance. They really like, they can make it hard sometimes,
Yeah.
but everyone, that's the nature of that too, is like, they all have crazy stuff happening. Some people live out of town, like they get stuck in traffic out of town. They're like, oh, I'm not going to make it. Like I need somebody who's close.
Yeah.
Type of thing. But yeah, I mean, it definitely happened a lot. And like some of the like best gigs, happen really fast like that actually. And then you do well and it starts to snowball.
Yeah. Do you find that the ones that come up really fast and then you're like, oh shit, like kick into gear, like instinct kicks in, now I gotta go, because of maybe, unless it's like a gig that's like, oh, I regularly sub in for this band, okay, it's more relaxed. But if it's like one thing where it's like, oh, new environment completely, or just because it's been so short notice, do you find that you are able to be more present and less just like kind of going on like a holding pattern? Do you find that you're able to be more present in those situations because of like the high stress, high anxiety nature of the show? Or did you really try to find like a present attitude for all gigs that you did across the board?
I mean, kind of depends on like I feel like there's a few definitions of present that could be
okay,
like kind of interpreted.
Please tell me. I would love to hear
like,
those
I
definitions.
mean, like,
yeah.
If you mean present, like present in the music, is that exactly what you're talking about? Or just like present, like socially and like environment wise, or? I
guess I'll just put it in the context of like when you whenever I was in college, there was a situation where I ran over to get a sandwich from the local coffee shop across the street from Texas State. And I grabbed a bag of chocolate because I didn't have time for a sandwich, and then ate them all within about 5 minutes. Turns out they were chocolate covered espresso beans. And I was wired in theory and just like, I have the answer, so like just the kind of being present where everything seems a lot more vibrant and not so much going on autopilot is more of the definition that I was.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah, definitely. Like some of that stuff takes, so much focus. Like I remember when I first moved to town, like one of the like good gigs that I was always getting like pretty last minute, and you don't really get any prep. I think they've gotten better about like sending stuff out, was like Arturo Farrell's Afro-Latin Jazz Orchestra. And like that music is so hard to sight read. And a lot of the stuff is really hard to sight read, especially if it's like a better group. And then there's, fitting in the vibe and the style and realizing that like, I have to not only like read this, but actually like listen to what's happening and realize that like something could be changing like that and go with it. Otherwise you like really stick out for that type of thing, because like that happened every Sunday. So like it was a whole bunch of people that knew the book really well, and they would change it up and stuff. But there were certain things they would do like every time. But it does make you like super present in a way that, yeah, like you're not kind of on autopilot and you're really listening to like every tiny little thing. Because if you have done that a few times, like eventually I would get to that gig and I'd show up and be like, okay, I kind of know like what's going to happen. And you could kind of like, there was more room to kind of like space out, especially if you've had a super long day and you're just kind of like listening to the overall groove rather than like the super like dissected groove. So yeah, that is kind of interesting. But then there's also the flip side where sometimes the music so well that like you're so present because like you're able to like try and make more things happen with the ensemble, which can
interesting.
Be really exciting.
Yeah.
Especially like especially like, yeah, when I would start, doing that gig a little bit more, and I kind of knew, I was like, okay, everyone in the section kind of has done this before. We know what's going on. And just like comparing it to last time, or like the Broadway shows, like it's like, you're the only sub, everyone else is regulars, and just like really like fitting into that. And the music really well, but it's just still like, it's just really fun when it's done so well by people who have done it for so long. And you can just kind of like sit in that and like, it's just like, wow, like that like accent was amazing. And you didn't know an accent could be, or like, a crescendo, decrescendo, like that type of stuff could be so like engaging, even if you've done it a million times, just because it's played so well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that kind of thing though. I remember Mike Saylor's telling me about that too, though. Where he's like in the Broadway shows thing, like there's a producer whose only job is to sit in there and like mark anything that he hears different from the status quo every night. So like I'm sure on those gigs that's probably like a little bit more stressful because it's like is there any room for innovation in terms of like even just something as simple as dynamics whenever you're doing the Broadway shows?
As a sub, no.
Yeah,
like,
right.
Yeah, being a sub there's some really hard things about it. And every pit's different. Every like collective vibe is kind of different, and some of the shows have been running for 10 years, like Wicked. Right. Yeah. I played like one of their big anniversaries. I think it might've been the 10-year, like 15-year anniversary.
Oh, whoa, cool.
And that was like, oh yeah, the producer, like, pretty much everyone's in the audience and there's a big party afterward, and it's like, yeah, I mean, that pretty much like Broadway subbing is like super, super, super high stress now, however many times you did it. I probably played Wicked like over 100 times, but
whoa.
I mean, it definitely like, if you do it like for a week at a time or something like that, like the last few days are like, you feel like, okay, cool. But it's hard. It's definitely hard, but that's another thing where like kind of give the audience what they want,
Yeah, right.
But that's the kind of the beauty of it though, is that like there's so many other opportunities outside of that. And the cool thing about doing that, even though it's the same thing every night, like there's always this like sense of excitement from the audience that is really like cool to feed off of, like especially with a show like Wicked that's so vastly popular. Like every time I would leave the back door, there would just be like a crowd of like 50 to 100 people just like like, yeah, of course, right. they wanted to see like the actors and actresses, but I still like, I was just like, this is so crazy and kind of cool. Like, I don't know, but it's just a vibe, like to have that energy and like just see people so happy. You can kind of like, okay, that's cool.
I think it's interesting whenever people come out the back door and like, if it's not the lead or like the supporting leads or whatever, like people will look at the playbill and then look at you and like look and see like, is that somebody? Cause they're just like, I would just want the autograph, so they have to like really see. And they're like, they kind of look different from their headshot cause they just got out of costume. And,
that's where whatever, the horn case helps, they pretty much like, but if you're a singer, like a background singer or something like that. Sure. For sure. Yeah. But it's kind of funny because like most of the time when you walk out, like people think it might be the main star and they're super excited. And then they have to conceal their like slight disappointment that the main star is not out yet. But then it's like, every once in a while you get like a band kid that's like super excited. Like the one kid in 50 that's like, oh, that was the trombone player. Like,
yeah, for sure. Oh man. Well, I didn't know, cause I knew you went to Berklee, but I guess I didn't know that you started at UTSA. So did you come up in San Antonio or this area, like in Texas?
I'm from Houston.
Okay.
And cool. I wanted to do chemistry originally. And then like I was doing the music, like a music minor, like how half of music majors start. And I just like, I came to a point where like, I realized like, I'm actually like pretty good at this. And maybe I should just try and do the music thing. And then if I fail, I can do chemistry because it's kind of harder to go vice versa. So I was like, people forgive you when you're young in music but it's hard to like turn 30 and then decide it's not unheard of. I actually know a really great trumpet player that kind of did other things. And then when he turned 30, like got really serious about it and is like doing all kinds of stuff. But like generally speaking,
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So, and then it was like, oh, I should probably go to like a school for music, or like a place that had a lot of performance opportunities. So I went to the East Coast because that was like kind of relating back to when we were talking about like school and having your own thing on the side. Like, I think the mark of a great jazz school is one that like allows you to perform. Like there's some that are like, you can't go do this, you have class or something like that. But like, a lot of the schools in New York and like Berklee and stuff, like my last semester was part-time and I went on tour for like 2 months and did my schoolwork kind of remotely, but they like recognize the importance of that. So I think, it's definitely like, if you go to school, it is definitely possible to have the outside stuff too.
Yeah, I will. Well, okay. As to not incriminate this person, because dang it, still works at this university, but that's okay. None of the staff is going to watch this video, and plus he's the best. So anyways, I'll just leave it at this. I had a professor in college who I was very close with, who I had, let's call it class responsibilities for certain things, but I was already gigging pretty full time by my sophomore year of college. And I was like, okay, do you want me to go to this recital where I'm singing for 12 people in the audience and 8 of those people are my fellow peers in my studio? Or should I go do a gig and maybe you can just find some like separate work for me to satisfy the requirements so you can put it in the grade book, you know? And this person, like for the rest of my college career, made it that kind of situation. And it was always one of those things where they'd be like, where's Christian? But nobody would like bring it up to the person because they all kind of knew. And this, I understand that this sounds terribly like, oh, I was doing all that. No, that's not how it's supposed to sound. But it's this idea that, as long as you're still trying to do something that is of equal work as the other people who are like fulfilling those requirements, like why are we in music school? We're in music school to heavily concentrate information that we need for the job field, but even more so to the point, we are equipping ourselves for the job field. So to squander opportunities that would grow your, job perspectives in the field, so you could just do this thing that is, again, in an echo chamber, feels counterintuitive. And I think that good universities that have high success rates of like alumni that go on to have a robust career understand the necessity of that. So 100%. But okay, so you went on a tour. What tour was that at the end of your degree?
It was an interesting tour. It was this thing called Cornerstone Chorale and Brass, and it was like this big choir, like with messages of positivity, accompanied by a brass quintet. It was a lot of fun. We went all over like the West Coast, got to see a ton of states, and the brass quintet I was the only one from Boston. It was all, it was a totally New York, like out of school professional, and a lot of those guys like play on Broadway shows now, and so I got to play in a quintet with those guys, and that was just like a great experience. And actually, like I got to use this as like my final project for my degree, which was called professional music, which sounds like kind of vague and like it's not a real thing. But
I was about to say that, yeah.
But it was awesome because like what it did is, so Berklee has like a big focus on technology, which I think is super lacking. And that's one thing that has been very helpful in the pandemic. Like I already knew how to do remote recording. I already knew how to do all this stuff and work all these programs. But the professional music degree is basically like you can do all the intro level courses to any of the majors that are usually only open to majors. So for example, like if I wanted to take a technology course that was only open to technology majors, I could take that as a professional music major. And I could also take like a course that was meant for only like composers or something like that.
Cool.
So you kind of get like the base level of each like of the areas, and then it gives you like the tools to learn by yourself and like do it on your own and find like get yourself very like, cool. Okay, these are the questions I need to ask. Like, these are the things I need to know. And so like, you don't necessarily like go super deep in school unless you choose to just like keep taking classes from one type of thing. But like, you kind of get like the minimum, and then you're able to build upon those skills by yourself, which I was like, this actually like is a really smart degree.
Yeah. Right. I think that's absolutely incredible. And I feel like that's the thing, like, high school students or young people in college go up to New York and ask people, or they just like DM them now, like where we just have readily available, conversation at any time. And people will say, well, like, how do I get to do what you're doing? Right. And it's like, that's not really the question to be asking, right? Like the skill is knowing what the right questions are to ask, so that way you can compound upon each one of those individual skills that will then create this like pyramid that gets you to the top of where you need to be. So that's a beautiful degree plan, and I wish people would implement that more, not just in like East Coast schools, but like all across the US and otherwise. Something that I was curious about too is, and we were kind of talking about the idea of stress and just kind of like really fast-paced nature of being in New York. I think that a lot of people make that jump either in the middle of a degree, after the degree, or maybe don't even get a degree and they just jump over there. But then, a lot of people realize that the lifestyle is a very kind of tumultuous one, and maybe like stick it out for a few years or for a few months or whatever, and then they just go, like, not for me. And it's not like speaking to their character, their person. It's just saying like their personality, just they don't want to have to acclimate to that kind of lifestyle. Did you have any sort of feelings like that at any point, like at the beginning, middle, or presently, where you felt like, oh man, this is a lot. Do I really want to be doing this at this kind of pace? Or is it just one of those things where it becomes like endearing?
Both, there's a lot of downsides to living in New York City that people don't like to, they don't highlight. Let me put it that way. I mean, like, like just how the housing situation is just a nightmare. Like, yeah. But the longer you are there and the more connections you make, I feel like there's a correlation between people who have gotten kind of lucky with like cooler, cheaper living situations and finding a cool landlord and stuff like that. Like that makes a big difference. And, just like the expense of anything extra, like the very basic stuff you can live by pretty cheap, but if you want a car, that's a whole extra thing. Yeah. Parking, insurance, all that stuff starts to add up really fast. And the reality is that there are not that many super high paying things either, and a lot of these things do not have like any sort of benefits or job security. So it takes a very like particular type of personality. Like for me, like, I don't know, I don't really plan on having kids, and I feel like if I was planning on having kids, I could never live this lifestyle. Yeah. Right. But that's just me, and like, to me, like music is kind of like, and now that I'm away from it, I really miss it. And it's like, there was times when I was like, what if I just move back to Texas and just like go, teach and like live a chill life in a nice apartment where stuff isn't always breaking and have a car. And, but it just, I think the only way you can truly find out is if you go and do it. And like, at the end of the day, I think anyone who moves to New York and like, you just like, your perspective is going to be widened one way or another. Your path is going to become clearer one way than another, like, because I think a lot of people ask themselves like, what if I move to New York, and it answers that question for you, and, pretty fast. I'm sure. I mean, it was super, super overwhelming at first, but like, that's why it's kind of good I feel like, to do it like if you're like kind of right out of school or something like that, like, because your life is already kind of like not permanent, because when you're in school, you're like, you're not living in a place where you're like, I'm going to live here forever. Like, that's just not even a thought. So I think it's like harder to get out of your comfort zone if you're in a comfort zone. So like if you say, oh, I'm going to move to New York, like a few years after I graduate college, like that's fine if that, but like, just consider that, like, comfort is like a very deceiving thing. And I think, for me personally, like the more comfortable I am, the harder it really is to like push myself. I mean, there's another extreme of that. Like if you're very uncomfortable and it's hard to pay bills, like it's also hard to be like creative and just finding that balance. But like for me, really like pushing myself and like keeping myself out of my comfort zone, even though it's not comfortable and it kind of sucks. Like I like the more my life goes on, the more I see like, oh, this is a good thing. Like this came from that and this came from that. And I just think it's hard, when you get too comfortable. Yeah.
Well, I think that, I've always, and I hadn't thought about it really in this way until right now, even though I know that I've thought this kind of like thought process before, is that I've always said like complacency is the enemy of progress. And I feel like comfortability is something that we should have more of, because I think the previous generation maybe of people it seems like a weird narc way to say that, the previous generation of people have kind of like made it this whole thing of like, no, you get up, you grind, you like work your ass off, and then you come home at the end of the day and you have a beer. But then guess what? Like I remember my dad always used to say, enjoy, and I love my dad, but he'd be like, enjoy the next like 4 years of college. Like after I graduated high school, he's like, cause like after that, it's just work for 50 years. And I remember just going like, oh shit, what a terrible way to think about life. Cause like, fuck, like you've now just put this in these three boxes. It's like adolescence, 4 years of college of like enjoying life, and then like 50 years of busting your ass and not having fun. So I feel like we've almost like tricked ourselves into thinking that if we are comfortable, that is somehow a lack of progress. But I think like the next evolution of like, or the next stage of comfortability that goes on the kind of opposite polar extreme of working yourself to death is like, there's comfortability and then there's complacency, because you realize how like cushy that is, but it can take away your work ethic. So then that gets to complacency. So I do think, like all things, it's kind of this thing that we meet in the middle, right? And we have this healthy balance of like, how can we take care of ourselves so that way the creativity continues to make itself available and thrive, while not, like I said, just like becoming too comfortable to wherever you lack the motivation to be creative, And I think that like the year before the pandemic, like obviously we started the episode talking this way, where we were saying that like trauma can put a lot of things into perspective. So before the pandemic, I was trying to work, like if I was working any less than 25 nights a month, I thought I was failing. I thought I was like I thought like my career is going backwards, but I realized that I was like not taking care of myself. And also it was affecting my relationships, not only with my partner, who has been very patient with me over the past 5.5 years, but like with family relationships and friendships and stuff, because it was becoming more obsessive about the career than finding a balance. And then the pandemic hit. And whereas this is a terrible thing, obviously, that has affected so many people, and I'm not saying it is a good thing at all, but like we said, like it puts things into perspective. We realize how subjective everything is. And it kind of was this wake up call to be a little bit more present and be like, okay, when gigs do start to come back, I want to make sure that I still take care of myself and focus on having a thriving career and find some sort of balance in that way. Again, a long tangent that I probably just, you were my impromptu therapist for a quick second, where just talk too much, but I do think that is a really beautiful sentiment.
Well, it's like, it's kind of like thinking about like the illusion of control and stuff like that. Like we always like to think that we can control our life and that we can plan for the future. If you do this, this, and this, and this, if you work every day, if you get a job with benefits, like, like, yes, we do need to be responsible and do things responsibly, but like also just COVID is like a huge thing of like making people really realize like, I'm not fully in control of things, but like, to me, I'd kind of like grapple with this concept, like after I fractured my kneecap before I was about to go to Europe for the first time, and it was like the end of the world. God. It wasn't the end of the world, but it just kind of like was another like kind of like my start into thinking and realizing like I don't have control of my life. And you can let that freak you out, but it's also kind of freeing if you think about it, because it's like, well, there's just like some stuff that's just like completely out of my control, and it has nothing to do with me. And it makes you like feel better about certain things that you might think is like a failure, or just like about crazy things happening. And it's just like, you know what, I just don't have control over it, and that's okay. And like the sooner you realize that and accept it, I think it kind of like makes a lot of things fall into place.
You said something in your statement, not to bring it back to that for too long, even though it's great, where you said, when I improvise, I get to choose my story. A story that's one of a kind and fleeting, much like our daily encounters. That story is different for everyone, and we have to look inwardly to decide for ourselves what that's going to mean. And I love that you said I get to choose my story. Personally, I use improvisation to like reclaim control over a minute part of my life, and traumas and stuff like that, and experiences. But do you feel like that improvisation has been a way for you to kind of like centralize this control over, you're like, okay, well, I can't control everything else that's going on, but at least here, like it does not happen without me. Like I am the vehicle that is driving this story and this improvisation.
Like, yes and no, because at the end of the day, you have to remember, like, I can control what I'm doing, but I actually really don't have any control over like how people are interpreting it either.
Yeah.
So like, it's almost like you get to talk in your own code and you can tell people what you really think. And they actually like aren't going to get it. I mean, like they might get it on some sort of level, and like anyone who like kind of gets it, like is not going to like judge you, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But like, it's my whole thing is just like, if I can like, bringing back to the honesty thing, like if I can like make what I'm doing like an honest thing, I think people are inspired by that sentiment of like, being genuine and honest delivery, that it can, evoke something in them, and we have no control what it evokes, but like just the fact that it's doing that is cool,
Yeah. Very cool. You know what else is cool? Video game music. How about that for a transition? No, but I did want to ask before too long, because sometimes I can just, just go. But the video game music stuff we were talking about the other day, whenever we were at the jam, and how like you had like ideas for certain things, and also just like your experience playing with Charlie and being in the 8-bit big band. And then also like I was going on your social media and realized that you wrote like an etude book, or I don't know if I should call it an etude book, like a duet book. There we go. Yeah. So that way people could play video game music. So like, has there been like a specific draw to video game music that feels at home for you, that you like to center yourself around? Or is it just kind of like, no, it's just like another interest that I wanted to make sure to document?
I just love the music, and it like, I have a hard time kind of like separating it from jazz for the most part. I mean, like obviously like it's a very diverse thing, but it's also like kind of indicative of like all the stuff I was trying to do in New York, which is just like such a vast array of music, and like it's kind of like a limitless genre. And that's kind of, what I appreciate about it, because it's just a limitless genre.
Yeah, right.
Literally. I mean, there's just so many things about it. Yeah. But I really think that, a lot of people in our modern world have been around video games. They've heard the music and they've been drawn to that music. And I think that that's similar to the way that people were drawn to jazz music back in the day. Like once everyone was into Broadway and they were doing Broadway songs, they knew those songs by heart. So when they heard a jazz musician playing it, they were like singing the lyrics in their ears. Yeah. And it also like helped them as a listener, whether they were doing it consciously or not, like kind of follow along with the improv and what was happening with that, making it more relatable. Yeah, right. And I think it's like a very relatable thing for audiences. And it also like, you can do all the jazz influence stuff you want in it. And some of it is just like straight up jazz. Yeah, right. But I mean, you can do anything to it. And it, just like having that familiar reference for people, I think makes a really cool like audience. It has a wider audience, and you can really get like emotional things, especially because those games are tied to like sometimes very like emotional moments in people's lives, like hanging out with cousins, like playing Mario Kart, like it's nostalgic. So
when I hear music from Sonic 2, like Sonic Adventures 2 or whatever the official title is, I'm just like, oh my God, this is like the, back on like my Sega Dreamcast, like Jesus Christ, that is like peak childhood, tapping into nostalgia. And I think even more so, like what we were talking about earlier, was the idea of, sometimes like at the college level, we start playing to each other, and rather than acclimating to our audience. And, people will be like, oh, like, jazz. Sometimes I'll hear people, even other supposed jazz musicians, say like, oh, like jazz is kind of dying, it's kind of like this. And it's like, what are you talking about? Like I can understand how, and I don't want to say that classical music is dying at all. Like, I don't want to be that guy that makes like a super, definitive statement. But the idea is like classical music is just recycling a lot of like really iconic, really amazing pieces that is absolutely a cornerstone that we need to keep going. But like, obviously, yeah, like people want to hear something new, they want to hear something that is acclimated towards their interests. So yeah, I almost feel like this idea of video game music being a new way to develop a new audience. Mike Saylors and I were talking about this the other day of like, okay, how do we take current pop songs and current, not even songs where then you do an arrangement on it, but take the styles that are popular today and marry it with the big band format in a way that is genuine and is not just a bastardization of swing or, putting a backbeat on something, right? And I don't think that's a conversation that's going anywhere either. Like, I think that is like here to stay. And obviously that's why you see people that are so successful at it, like Charlie in New York, because it's like, it's filling a niche that is really like, not just like a niche and then it's a dead end. It's like filling this very kind of like narrow pathway, and then it's opening up to so much more and beyond. Yeah, it's very exciting. It's very exciting.
And I do think that classical music is kind of doing this. If you think about Pop's concerts, those are the most attended concerts of anything.
This is true.
Yeah. And like, or like doing movie music or, stuff like that. That's kind of like the classical version of that. Like one of the gigs I did recently before everything happened was I actually did a K-pop like orchestra and it sold out at like one of the big theaters. I think it was Avery Fisher Hall, like one of the Lincoln Center theaters where like the Phil plays, Yeah. And it was, it was just contracted by one of the local contractors. And yeah, it was K-pop. It was sold out. Like I think it was like their best attended concert in a long time. And yeah, I mean, that's
amazing. It makes me think of, and again, like I always say to everybody, like, it's just a matter of when people are going to take the shot. Whenever I say Kurt Elling's name in the show, because I always say it at least once in every show. Naturally, I don't pre-plan it, but like this, made me think about it was that, I guess the lead singer or one of the main members of, BTS was asked in an interview. They were like, who would you like to collaborate with, out of anybody like on the scene? And the guy was like, well, there's this great jazz singer named Kurt Elling. And it was like way out of left field for like, a K-pop person. Like, and of course, like Kurt like shared that on all social media and was like, hey, like totally in support, like let's do it, and then he did one of the BTS tunes on one of his live streams from the Green Mill.
Korea has a big jazz overlap, though. If you think about it, it's like, oh yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, there's a lot of international students that come here from Korea.
That I had never thought about that before, but yeah, I guess I was just thinking about it in terms of like pop and jazz being separate worlds, but you're right, there is a lot of overlap. But yeah, and it was just so cool because it was like, oh, these two worlds, coming together, and what a cool way for you to merge audiences, not only if like the artists have admiration for each other, but then that's going to make people go and check that out. So anyways, yeah, so cool. So cool. I want to ask you a couple quick questions before we end. The first one is that, like, obviously we're all listening to stuff all of the time. What can you think of, or like, are there any albums that you can think that, whether it's this week, like today, this week, this month, or of all time, that you're like, these are the required listening suggestions that people need to go check out?
Well, since I'm a trombone player, when I think of trombone, if like someone had never heard trombone and they were just like, what should I listen to? I would say the album Stoneflower by Jobim.
Okay.
It's Irby Green and like a rhythm section. And it's so beautiful. And I feel like it just relates to anybody because, it's very like kind of like textural music. So it's super relaxing, but it's also not like cheesy, Mm-hmm. I'm like, this is like spa music. Like, I don't know. But I love that album. I think that's a really great album. One of my favorite artists of all time. I've kind of been trying to like get in a little more new music, but this particular artist I've known about for a long time. His name's Kevin Barnes, and he has this band called Of Montreal. The name's always confusing because people are like Montreal. I'm like, no, it's Of Montreal.
Gotcha.
Kind of a weird name, but
it's like telling people Duke Ellington's Sound of Love, and they're like, oh yeah, by Duke Ellington. No. Duke Ellington's Sound of Love. Anyways, continue.
But the reason why I like him is like he's such a complete version of an artist, like a modern day artist, because he pretty much does all of his albums, and he comes out with a new album like every year. He has for like the past 10 years, and all of them are amazing. They all sound super different, but they all sound like him. And the other thing that I like about it is that he does everything himself. And then like occasionally for different albums, he'll kind of collab with someone else. Mm-hmm. But there's a few albums where like he does everything himself. So he's playing the drums, he's playing bass, he's playing guitar, and like he has like a really insane vocal range. But the thing I like about the music is that like each time I listen to it, I hear way different things. And like, that's just not a super common thing. I feel like when I'm listening to music, especially like with a more like advanced ear that's just like constantly like nitpicking for stuff and like listening and like has a million patterns, you know, it's like, oh, okay, I kind of know what's going to happen. But he has a very like vast harmonic language, and like everything is his vision. And also his lyrics are super crazy. Mm-hmm. Every time he comes out with an album, I always have to like look up words in the dictionary, which is like, sounds so weird. And there's like words I've never heard before. He also makes a lot of like pop culture, historical, like all different types of references of like events or like Greek gods and stuff like that. That's just like, whoa, it's just so weird. Like that I'm having to like look this stuff up. And like, I'm learning like about like all these random things from listening to this dude's song. And it's just like super freaking groovy too, which is, it's just like none of it.
What's his name?
Of Montreal. His name's Kevin Barnes.
Okay.
But I just like feel like this is really underrated. And sometimes I show people it and they're just like, yeah, I don't know if I like this. So I'm just like, no, maybe I'm just weird. But the other thing I like too is like, he's got really weird music videos that are like also cool. His brother is an artist. So like his brother like will do animations. And I feel like the biggest thing about his music that I really like and that he's doing like by himself is that like, for me, I say great music, it paints a picture, it tells a story, you know, it's poetry, like it's basically all art forms all in one thing, if it's done correctly, I think. And just someone who has like that aspect of it is like crazy. And I also like, if we're looking modern, I also like, I think another creative artist is Tune Yards. They just came out with an album. I don't think they're quite as advanced as Of Montreal, but I mean, like they're still amazing, you know. Kevin Barnes is just like, I don't know. But that's an artist I really look up to, but it's kind of funny just that like, I would never perform the style of music that he does. Yeah. I don't know. I'm just not like, it's not that I wouldn't want to or anything. It's just like, there's no trombone and like, I don't know. Yeah. But yeah, I really enjoy that. And, you know, I always like going back and listening to Mingus as well. Like it's one of my kind of like go-to.
Do you dig on Louis Cole?
Yeah.
Whenever you were kind of describing Of Montreal, it like, I won't say exactly because obviously I haven't heard, but it was kind of giving me like similar Louis Cole vibes. And I like kind of just looked him up and just his picture too. Man, style, this guy.
Yeah. He's like, I would definitely like say like there's some similar vibes going on with those two. Definitely like very different, but like similar, like funkiness, like definitely like a cool sense of groove and like just like kind of like persona and swagger. Kevin Barnes is like, he's like a huge fan of Prince and David Bowie. So there's a lot of that type of thing, especially like David Bowie's thing where I love David Bowie, like Black Star is another album I love so much. And it's got Donnie McCaslin on saxophone. Maria Schneider did like some of the orchestrations. Like this is the last album that was like right before he died. And it's like,
whoa,
it's like, it's insane. Do you know who Donnie McCaslin is?
I don't.
He's a great saxophone player. I would kind of like put him in a similar vibe as like Chris Potter. They have like kind of a similar vibe, but definitely different great players. But like, and and yeah, he was like, David Bowie was friends with Maria Schneider. And
That's crazy.
there's a few like alternate takes, but he actually went for like an avant-garde jazz sound in this album. He got like jazz musicians and did that. But that's the thing I loved about David Bowie too. And Kevin Barnes kind of like took from that, where like, if you listen to David Bowie's albums, like a lot of them are very vastly different. He like makes up different characters, like Ziggy Stardust, you know, Aliens from Mars type of thing.
Right.
And also just like, you know, gender fluidity and, you know, like also like taking a lot of influences and crediting Black musicians. You know, so like Kevin Barnes is kind of like taking a similar like type of approach to David Bowie, but the difference between Kevin Barnes and David Bowie is that Kevin Barnes does like everything, you know, himself.
Yeah, right.
Not that like David Bowie's not amazing, like he's deep, he's super deep. But yeah.
Do you listen to Sufjan Stevens?
A little bit. I haven't delved in too much, but I should.
It reminded me of that because you were saying that you're like he does all these albums and has all this content, but like each one is vastly different. If I remember you saying that correctly, and Sufjan is the same way, where like me trying to describe Sufjan Stevens to somebody, like you can't just any one. And this is something Ryan Hagler and I were talking about on the last episode, but like any one genre to attribute to him feels like a disservice, because it feels so much more expansive and all encompassing than if I were just say like indie, you know, because like what is that? Like what's indie? I mean, it's just it's an umbrella, you know, genre. Anyways, yeah, like Sufjan uses super expansive orchestration, and like he also wrote the film score for Call Me by Your Name, and all this different stuff. But like each album is vastly different, like a completely different thing, and yet all maintains this like thread of continuity that just feels so uniquely Sufjan. And I think that's when I think you've really zeroed in on your craft and you've made something that is unique, when people can't compare it to anything else, but they go, it's all different, but it's all the same at the same time. We should all be so lucky, you know, to arrive at something like that.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say like 10% of every genre is really good. That's kind of how I feel about music. What's your favorite genre? 10% of each of them.
That's so funny. Well, the last question that I always end with, and I love asking this question, is that we all have gigs from hell where things go like totally up the wall, and we're just like, what the hell is happening? So can you think of in your time, either before college, during college, or your tenure in New York, where you had like an especially hellish gig?
I'm gonna have to dig up some suppressed memories.
Please, I'll pay for the therapy sessions afterwards. Just send me an invoice.
You know, it's kind of hard to like really pinpoint like one specific thing, just because I've done so many like kind of weird gigs that like even the weird stuff started to feel normal.
Oh man. Okay.
That makes sense. Like, I don't know. I think maybe
it could be something that was just like really funny too. It didn't have to necessarily be traumatic.
Maybe like random, okay. I think is maybe like what I can say without throwing anybody under the bus or like insulting someone. But I did this party. It was like a 4th of July party, and we were a surprise for the guest. It was some like lake house in New Jersey.
Okay. And
they hired like 15 of us to basically like hide out in their garage and then like march out in marching band uniforms and play patriotic music for the 4th of July. And there was an Uncle Sam on stilts.
Okay. All right. Great. Wait, I wish that you were like, yeah, and then the Uncle Sam guy, you know, fell down before. Oh my gosh, that's better than where I was going to go. I thought you were going to be like, I got called last minute to do this patriotic gig, and it turns out they wanted me to be Uncle Sam on stilts while playing bass trombone. Oh my God,
yeah. I do know a trombonist who does play trombone on stilts in New York, and he plays with some group, and they make good tip money. But oh my God, I have a heart attack every time I see a photo of him on stilts with a trombone. I'm just like, that just sounds so dangerous. Like,
yeah, right. Your instrument is a long, fairly pointy thing.
They better be giving him hazard pay, you know.
We will definitely have to get together, like we were talking about, and just chat over drinks. I loved that whenever we met at the jam the other night, I was like, hey, I have a gig to offer you. And then I turned to Ron and I was like, I haven't forgotten about your text. I'm just really bad at texting back. And he's like, I'm on your ass, man. I'm on your ass. Like, don't worry. So no, but I'm looking forward to hitting on the bandstand and just hanging. But thank you so much for coming on. This has been super fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me, for sure. I'm looking forward to it. It's gonna be fun.
Cool. All right. I'll see you soon. Bye.
Peace out.